I want to talk a little bit about test anxiety because I imagine that it's a lot of what brought you here tonight, or else you'd be doing something else. So I want you to take a moment, think this through, and then let me know. What is literally the worst thing that would happen if the LSAT did not go well for you whenever you're taking it? 3 to 5 years from now, you look back and you say, my God, my LSAT this weekend went disastrously. What would the consequences be? Walk through that, take a moment, think it over, then we'll talk about it. We'll walk through some of these best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, and sometimes it turns out that the worst case scenario isn't as bad as it could have been. I was talking with a student of mine recently, and she was putting herself under a lot of stress, and she was feeling a lack of motivation. And part of that was simply because she thought that if the LSAT did not go well for her, she would have to go back to college. She'd have to go back to college, get a second bachelor's degree in order to become a master's in social work or get some sort of grad level degree in psychology. And I happen to know quite a few MSWs. So I was able to set her straight, and I was able to tell her, listen, it turns out that you don't need to change what you studied in undergrad and go back in order to have another shot and to go on to grad school in that area. Turns out you can major in almost anything and get a master's in social work. And she was dreading having to tell her parents that she'd have to waste 4 years of her life and get another degree. Turns out it was all in her head, and she didn't need to worry about any of that at all. Well, hey guys, so about 8 o'clock, I see a few more of you have showed up. Wanted to talk a bit about test day tonight. Tonight, we're gonna cover what to do, what to bring, what to do over the next few days, how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with the proctors, how to properly simulate test day conditions in the last few days. So we're gonna have a lot of fun. We're gonna cover all these areas and much more. So I'm excited to answer your questions and talk about whatever is on your mind, whatever is concerning you, whatever you would like help with. So feel free, drop some chats there and let me know what's going on for you. A bit about me. My name is Steve Schwartz. I'm the founder of the LSAT blog, and I'm the author of a series of top-selling LSAT courses and study guides. Most recently, I released a series of LSAT and test day checklists. And I created those because they include all the little items and details that students don't usually think of. And they're a great way for you to hold yourself accountable and make sure that you're not missing anything. So if you're interested in finding out more about those, there are details and a link to them in a description below this video. So I want to talk a bit about minimizing stress, because I know that this is something that's on a lot of people's minds. First of all, stress, nerves, anxiety, a part of it comes down to our brain's natural fight or flight response. And there's a number of ways that we can deal with this. One of them, and my favorite, is meditation, specifically mindfulness meditation, where you focus on one particular thing, your thoughts, as they arise, as they pass, just noticing them, acknowledging that, and moving on. Even just 5 minutes a day of this, even just over the next 3 days or so, would have an enormous impact. And if you're going for November, then it could have an even bigger impact because you'd have a longer period of time to execute it. I actually have found meditation enormously helpful personally, as well as in my LSAT career. I even have this little Buddha statue here to remind me to meditate. And so you might consider the same, but of course, you don't have to associate anything in particular with meditation. It does not have to be spiritual in nature. And there are other kinds of meditation as well. You could do meditation where you just focus on your breath. Again, notice a theme there, focus. You could also practice loving kindness meditation where You simply wish well for other people. And you might think, why is that useful? Because I'm the one who wants to do well on the LSAT. Well, part of why you're anxious is that you're focused so much on your own outcomes and the importance that this is for you. And if you take a moment and you think to yourself, well, there's a lot of other people out there who need help too, and maybe it's worth focusing on them. And you realize that everyone taking the LSAT around the world, all the tens of thousands of people, they're all stressing equally, and my stress is just one little bit of that. And if I could raise all of them up, then maybe I'd raise myself up too, if for no other reason than by reducing my own stress. So that's another thing you could be thinking about. Practices like yoga, practices like just getting outside and taking a walk every once in a while. That could actually be enormously helpful as well to minimize your stress. Now, if you don't feel you have the time to do any of this, that probably means that you need it more than anyone else because you're stressing so much. So take the time. You might even just want to take a hot bath, a hot shower, spend some time watching TV the day before. Relaxing the day before is crucial. So if you're stressing right now, just take a moment to plan out what the day before the LSAT is going to look like for you. If it involves taking a hot bubble bath, go buy some bubbles, go on Amazon and order them so that they'll be here in the next couple of days, and you could actually put that little tip into practice. You could go get a massage. You could schedule that now, have something fun to look forward to, and you could also do the same for after the LSAT. So a lot of things you could be doing. That's just part of it. Proper preparation with simulating test day conditions is also just as important, and I'll talk about that more in a bit. But first, I wanted to take a look at this question I got here from Michelle. Michelle asks, how do I prepare the warm-up? Should it be done in the early morning before I head out? I heard the waiting time is long and no material is allowed in the test center. That is absolutely true, Michelle. You cannot bring in papers, you cannot bring in books, booklets, magazines, none of that. So your printed and photocopied practice problems probably won't be allowed in with you. So the question is, how and where do you do it? If you're taking the LSAT in a more urban setting, then you might have a coffee shop within walking distance or maybe a very short drive from your test center. If you're taking the LSAT a bit farther from home, then you might plot out a spot along your route to stop off and do your practice problems. You might have to do them at home or in the car. And if that's the case, no big deal. The value in the practice problems is simply that the first questions you're doing when you walk in on test day are not the actual problems that count. So if there's an hour-long gap between doing the practice problems and the actual ones, then that's okay. You're still warmed up to some degree, and it'll be enough for you. Now, what do you warm up with? You could warm up with a favorite logic game, a favorite passage, a favorite couple of logical reasoning questions. It doesn't really matter. You want these to be problems that you've done before so that you're not totally freaked out if they don't go well. And you also don't even necessarily want to score them. This is not to measure yourself. This is not to get a sense of where you're at. This is just to get your brain a little bit fired up with a practice run before the actual thing. So don't overthink this. If you can't do it for some reason, it's not the end of the world. But sometimes people score slightly worse on earlier sections because they're not quite warmed up yet. So something to think about. I hope I answered that fairly thoroughly. Happy to answer follow-ups. Happy to take on other questions. What are some of the common LSAT test center problems? So that's a question I get a lot. One problem is the desk is too small. One problem is the person next to me is annoying. They could be blowing their nose. They could be erasing really heavily. They could be knocking into you a little bit. Maybe the room is too hot. Maybe the room is too cold. Maybe the proctors are circling around. Maybe they're even talking to each other or talking on their cell phones, or there's a marching band playing outside, or the fire alarm goes off. Now, I'm not saying any of these things are likely to happen, but they might happen. It's entirely possible. And you want to do what you can to minimize the risk of that happening. So, or at least how you respond to it. So, problems with the proctors. One thing you could do is you could, before the exam starts, talk to them and ask them or confirm with them, are we getting a 5-minute warning before the end of each section? Are we getting a break between the third and fourth sections? How much time are you giving us per section overall? All of these things. Making friends with them a little bit. If it turns out that they will not let you bring in a banned item, then you could always show a printout of LSAC's website saying that this item is permitted. I should have said permitted earlier. But basically, if something is permitted, LSAC's website says that. You could ask them to pull it up on their phone to confirm that. You could have a printout from the website. And you could also maybe email LSAC, get confirmation in the email, and then print that out and bring that with you. So those are some strategies you could use to mitigate issues with the proctor. The room being too hot or too cold, you could bring layers. And that way, no hoodies though, because hoodies are not allowed, but something else that, a sweatshirt of some kind, a cardigan, a blazer. Blazer also helps you feel pretty sharp, which is also a potential confidence booster. So there's that to consider also. Obviously, marching band, fire alarm, nothing you can really do about those. You could always contact LSAC afterwards and they'll probably give you a free retake. That's probably the best that you would do with them, unfortunately. As for other test takers, you could call over the proctor and ask them to deal with this person if it becomes completely overwhelming. But if it's more minor than that, then you just want to practice in similar conditions. So maybe instead of practicing at home in your perfectly sterile environment where there's always a fresh glass of water next to you and the bathroom's only a short walk away and none of this is actually real, you could go to a Starbucks, use an actual timer, and time yourself strictly. And if somebody knocks into you or they bother you or they interrupt you for a second, all of that's on the clock and you still have to keep moving. So practice to make it as real for yourself as possible and do whatever you can to think about what is my worst case scenario and how can I prepare against it so that when I encounter it on test day, it's not the first time that I'm dealing with this issue. So if your nightmare is 2 reading comp sections back to back, prepare for that and do that. Make that your next practice exam. If it's 3 logical reasonings back to back, then do that. The test is Saturday. It's about 3 days away. So you could do a timed LSAT on Wednesday or Thursday the week before, and then review it the following day, and then take the day before off. That's typically the schedule I would recommend in the final week. This is not the time to do 3 full-length exams back-to-back on consecutive days. This is not the time to come up with a whole new course of action. This is not the time to try out anything completely new. We're already in the final week at this point, so any radical changes that you would think to make, you should have made them already and tested them out already, because at this point, you've really only got time for 1 more practice test. If the exam is 3 days away, you've got 1 more practice test, either a Wednesday or a Thursday, and then doing absolutely nothing the day before. The only thing you can do the day before is relax, minimize time on the internet, minimize time on message boards and forums. Even my website, don't spend much time on there. Just read only about preparing for test day specifically. You could watch videos like this one. I have a few others. And you could simply just take it easy, because at this point, either really you know it or you don't. So shore up your weak areas, yes, but that's pretty much it. Got another question here. Any strategy in reading comp if I have only 5 minutes left when I get to the last passage? Yeah, that's a good one. So 5 minutes left, and this goes for any section really. If you have 5 minutes left, you want to go back and attack anything you had difficulty with previously in the section. So if there's a tough problem you encountered you weren't sure about, spend a few extra minutes on that. Now, looks like I misinterpreted this question. Actually, it's 5 minutes left before getting to the last passage. My misunderstanding. So you have 5 minutes left. It's the last passage or even the last game. Obviously, our average amount of time allotted is 8 minutes and 45 seconds. So if that's the amount of time that you have, just 5 minutes, your odds obviously are not going to be that high. So you want to attack any general global questions for reading comp. So those would be main point, primary purpose, passage organization, best topic for the best title for the passage, author's tone, anything general in nature. Those are easier to knock out, and those are the sorts of things that you want to be knocking out anyway when you're reading the passage for the first time. That's what you want to walk away with. If you had 5 minutes left when you got to the last logic game, that's a very different story. In that case, you want to make your main diagram, answer any orientation questions, then answer any local questions because those give you a jumping off point. You simply have to draw the diagram specifically for those. There's no major inference that you need to have seen at the beginning. So that's my thoughts on that. If you had only 5 minutes left and you still had something like 10 hard logical reasoning questions remaining, then I would probably just focus on a few of those hard ones because they require the time. You might not be able to solve them in only 30 seconds per question. That doesn't strike me as the most reasonable course of action. So I'd be thinking about just cutting your losses and doing fewer rather than trying to attempt everything. That's a general theme, I guess, of my whole answer for this question is don't try to do an extraordinary amount of questions in a very short period of time because the harder questions have a greater deal of complexity and will actually require more of you than the easier questions that would appear earlier. Let's see, question about what to wear. Aside from just general clothing related stuff, is the room too hot or too cold? You might want to think about dressing for comfort overall. So if, for some people wearing a button down or a suit and dress shoes might help them feel confidence and, going in really officially. For other people, that might be really uncomfortable. For me personally, that would be a bit uncomfortable. And so I wouldn't do that. I would have loved to wear a hoodie on test day, but they don't permit those. I did bring a hoodie when I took the LSAT because I didn't know about this, and I actually had to leave it outside. So I stashed it in a bush somewhere in a nearby park because the proctors wouldn't hold on to it, of course. So yeah, no hoodies, but comfort is important. If you want to wear sweatpants or basketball shorts, I think that's perfectly fine. If you want to wear flip-flops, totally fine. It's about whatever works for you. What to eat and drink. I would recommend keeping it simple, keeping it light the morning of. So oatmeal, eggs, banana. I think protein is good. Energy bars, Cliff bars, totally fine. I wouldn't try anything new on test day. I wouldn't eat something that I hadn't ever eaten before, like a bagel with tuna fish, for example, a really bad idea. The night before, I would not eat anything too heavy. I would try to keep it light so that you can sleep well. So again, nothing you haven't eaten before. I wouldn't eat too late at night. I wouldn't eat anything especially spicy. I wouldn't go to the all-you-can-eat buffet. None of those things are likely to end well. You want to go to bed early. You want to go to bed on a fairly light stomach, but not being hungry. And I would say for what to drink, I would say coffee. If you already drink coffee, don't change anything. Keep with that if it works for you. You don't want to have a caffeine headache. But also keep in mind that coffee is a diuretic. So you don't want to have anything that will make you have to go to the bathroom too often or for any reason. So that relates also to a question I've gotten about bathroom jitters. This person says, has any student asked you about bathroom jitters, such as nerves creating the urge to go? Maybe the coffee or water is just doing their thing. I don't even know how to best ask such a question. Yeah, you asked that fine. I get what you mean. Nerves can definitely do that to a person, and it's happened to me at times. I would say reduce your coffee, reduce your water, still have what you need. They're a symptom of a root cause, which is anxiety, and this is normal. So if you can reduce anxiety, you can reduce your bathroom jitters. So I'd be walking through best case and worst case scenarios 3 to 5 years from now. The more you do that for yourself, the more real you make it, the more your anxiety will diminish, because you'll see that the awful, negative, catastrophic outcome that you're envisioning for yourself isn't necessarily as bad as you think it is, and things can turn around for you. So let's say this LSAT doesn't go well for you. Well, you can retake. There's always a future LSAT date. You can always take it, later in the fall, in the winter, in the early spring. Rolling admissions matters a lot less than it used to. Back in the day, when there were like double the number of law school applicants there are now, it mattered a bit more, because law schools would just take people the moment of, because they were afraid that student would choose a different school and they would lose their wonderful 165 plus score or 170 plus score. And nowadays, it's flipped around a bit, where there are so few applicants that law schools are actually choosing to wait to see who else will come along. And so they are deferring people. They are waitlisting people. So applying early matters much less than it used to. Students are retaking far more than they used to. And so law schools are waiting to see who else is going to come along. And that means that you don't have to wait for them either. You can just say, okay, well, this test is just like any other. It's just a practice run where I happen to get LSAC's proctoring. And this exam will one day be released as test 85, 86, 87, 95, 103, whatever. And some future test taker, a year from now, a month from now, 6 years from now, they'll be taking my very exam, and it'll be their practice. And so I can treat this exam the same, because the importance of the LSAT does not rest on this particular LSAT administration. It rests on your LSAT score in general. And this exam that you're taking coming up very soon is not the actual LSAT exam that the only one. It's not the end all be all. You have future test dates that you can take. It's not like there's any sort of limit. There used to be a limit. You could only take the LSAT 3 times in a 2-year period, but LSAC's removed that. So you could take it you could take every exam for the next year. You could take it half a dozen times. You could take it 10 times. You could travel around the world and take it in Asia and Europe, and you could take it on the Sabbath observer's date. You could take it when there's a snowstorm and they do a retake. You could do all those things. There are so many LSAT opportunities for you, and you're not limited to any one. And of course, you can, if you want more proctoring, you can also go to one of the free proctored experiences offered by the major prep companies for marketing purposes. And you can bring your own exam if you want more practice opportunities. So this LSAT test date coming up, it's not the only one. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Got one question here from Jenny. Any differences in tests administered in the US and those outside the US? Yeah, I got another one also about the Asia test. Is there any difference between overseas and North America? The your questioner asks, I assume there wouldn't be any, but still wanted to ask someone with more expertise just to be sure. Yeah, great question. I get this one a lot. It turns out that there is a difference in that it's not the same test form. So if you get this, circle game about monkeys, someone in Asia might get a pure sequencing game about clowns, and you might get yours and they get theirs, and there's no overlap. That's the point. There's no overlap. So the people who are taking the test overseas a month from now or a week from now, whatever it is, or they're taking the Sabbath observer's test, it's not as if they're going to get advanced knowledge on the internet from everyone taking it now and everyone taking it on your test date. So don't worry. Nothing unfair is happening here. The test is exactly the same in nature, in that it's meant to be of equal difficulty. They're also going to have 1 logic games, one reading comp, 2 LRs, and an experimental. And they'll also have the 35-minute constraint, but everything else will be pretty much the same. As a bit of LSAT trivia, the LSAT India exam is a little bit different in that that's a test administered for law as an undergrad level degree, whereas in North America, the law and the LSAT is used as a graduate level degree and graduate level education experience. So for that reason, the LSAT India only has 4 answer choices per question, whereas everyone else for the grad level has 5 answer choices per question. So if you ever come across LSAT India practice exams, you might notice that small difference, but that's pretty much it. LSAC, one reason they don't release every test administered is because they want to save some exams, some test forms, to use for overseas administrations and to use for Sabbath observers, or if something goes wrong due to the weather and they have to delay by a few weeks. So that's pretty much the deal on that. There's no benefit to taking it one place or another. It really just depends ultimately on which is the best test center for you. I've seen, what the LSAT India test centers look like, and I guess because India is a fairly populous country and a lot of their LSATs are probably administered in major cities like New Delhi, that their test centers are not the most comfortable. I saw one photo where they seemed pretty crammed and small desks very close together. And so maybe certain test centers in other big cities could be just as crowded and maybe not the nicest, brand new, modern facilities. So I know a lot of students take the LSAT in places like Beijing, for example, or in Rome. And I've heard reports that those test centers might not be the nicest. So do your research, Google around a bit. I'm here in New York, and New York Law School is a pretty great test center. And so there is an advantage to taking the LSAT when your test center is going to be relatively nicer. But that's pretty much the deal on that. My scores fluctuate pretty wildly. I've been taking a bunch of practice tests. I find myself scoring a bit higher on more recent ones, but I'm doing the earlier ones and my scores dropped a bit. Should I be concerned? Would you happen to have any tips for improvements? I'm really aiming for a 175 plus. Yeah, so scores fluctuate. It happens. It's real. I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why, and the answer is chance. So scores fluctuate because you are not the same person on any given day. And not all exams are equal in nature. Some are harder than others. And of course, the exam is equated. So it's not as if they are meant to be harder, but you are not equally good at all things. You're better at some things and you're worse at other things. So if you really hate science reading comp passages and the LSAT that you take has an easy science reading comp, you might be fine. Then if the LSAT you take later has a harder science reading comp, you might get a bit flustered by that and do poorly. Same goes if there's a freak logic game type that you're not that familiar with. So if you haven't done any pattern games in a while and you suddenly get one, your score is going to drop. Next time, no pattern game, your score improves. Or maybe you're tired or hungover when you do one exam and you're fresh and energetic the next time. That causes score fluctuations. So you stay consistent by being good at everything they can throw at you. And you stay consistent by making sure that you are the best possible version of yourself at all times. What that means is that you sleep well, you get good exercise, you meditate, you eat well, you get outside, you relax, you do all the stuff that you know you should be doing. And you get pumped. So you have a playlist and you listen to other stuff. You listen to podcasts. You watch movies that are positive and upbeat and get you in the right mindset. So maybe you're watching Rocky or Friday Night Lights. Those are two of my favorites. Maybe you listen to Jock Jams and Eye of the Tiger. You go on YouTube and you watch 40 inspirational speeches in 2 minutes, or you listen to guided meditations. So you're doing that stuff consistently. You're doing it every day without fail. You block off time in your schedule to do this. And so every practice test you take, you are feeling pumped up. you have the sleep you need, and you have shored up all your weak areas, everything possible. And so when you take your exams, you'll be in good shape. And so if maybe over the past few weeks, you go out late one Friday night because you just needed a break, you had a few too many drinks, then you go take a full-length exam Saturday morning because you feel like you should, even though you're probably not feeling that great and maybe it's not the best use of your time and you're better off sleeping a few more hours. Guess what? The test doesn't go well for you, and it's because you're hungover. Your mind is cloudy. And honestly, you have no one to blame but yourself. And I'm sorry to tell you that, but alcohol, drugs, these are not things that you have room for in your life right now if you want to achieve your maximum potential. And yeah, we all know people who somehow are the comeback kid, and somehow they're always able to roll off a binge like it was nothing, or they're a pothead and they smoke every night and they're still an uber genius and can still get 175 plus. Those people, they're super impressive. I don't know how they do it, and they might not live to be 80, but most people are not that. I'm certainly not that, and you might not be either if I'm guessing right. So what that means is that you need to take control of your mindset, take control of your schedule. If you're studying for the exam only a few days away, these next 72, 90 hours, whatever it is, you keep that very rigid, where you block out all the people and things in your life that are not setting you up for success. So if you have some emotionally draining, vampire friend who just wants to tell you all their problems, cut them off for the next few days. Say, I'm busy, I've got the LSAT coming up, and I will check in with you afterwards. And you surround yourself with positive, uplifting people who want the best for you. And that means maybe you block off all the narcissists on Facebook who are just trying to show off how concerned they are about the latest political thing, or they're posting selfies of how great they look with their summer bod. Like, none of that matters right now. And you don't need to see some artificially constructed perfect version of someone else's life. You need to sit there with your practice problems and put that positive media in front of yourself. And believe me, you're not getting it on Facebook. You're not getting it on the news. You're getting it from a carefully curated reality. And rather than that carefully curated reality being what some major corporation wants you to see, you're putting in front of yourself birds chirping. I don't care what it is. You're putting something nice in front of yourself that you want to be there. And it's either that or the LSAT or a walk in the park. And that's all you do the next few days. You are going into an isolation tank of butterflies and snowflakes. And I hope you like it there, because it's not going to be forever, but you need to make this your mission right now. What to do about whether to cancel your score. Assuming that the LSAT does not go well for you on test day, or you think it didn't go well. Well, how do we know? What's the difference? Not always easy to tell, especially when you are so close to the problem that you have tunnel vision and you can't see straight. Once you walk out of the LSAT, your brain is going to be fried. And if you've done a 5-section exam, or maybe even gone really nuts and done a 6-section exam, you know what your brain being fried feels like. And you're not in the best situation to make an evaluation of where you stand. So for that reason, I would say don't make any sudden moves. You don't need to cancel your score right away. You've got something like 6 calendar days from the day of the exam to cancel your score. And there is no benefit to canceling the day of or the day following versus 3 days later. As long as you don't forget and you set a reminder for yourself, and I'm guessing you probably won't forget because the LSAT's a big deal, you will always have the chance to come back later with a fresh perspective and see where you stand. So for that reason, I would say, first of all, just don't do anything drastic in the moment. What you can do is take a reasoned assessment of how the test went. And I want you to walk through the following questions. First of all, were you fully prepared? Did you do everything that you reasonably could have done? Or is it like the day of the exam, you suddenly realize that for the past 2 to 3 months, you've been doing everything wrong. You've been working out of some awful off-the-shelf prep book from the bookstore that doesn't even use real LSAT questions, and the store employee recommended it because they get product placement from fees from the manufacturer or something like that. If that's the book you've been using and it was using fake questions, then yes, you've been doing it wrong. You could probably improve your score drastically by taking a wholly different course of prep. But if, on the other hand, you've been prepping in a reasonably solid way, you've been using well-reviewed LSAT materials from trusted sources, you've been using actual LSAT problems, and you've been getting advice from people that you consider to be experts. Maybe you've even been taking their courses or using their study plans, and you found that it just fell apart for you for one vague reason or another. Now, let's define fall apart. Is it that you suddenly forgot everything and were at a loss for the entire 35 minutes per section? Or is it that you encountered a couple of difficult problems and weren't entirely sure how to handle them, and maybe didn't answer them as perfectly as you could have? If you just have this vague sense of dread because you didn't answer everything 100% correctly, then maybe you don't need to cancel. Maybe you could take a couple of days and think, it might not have gone perfectly. Maybe it's a couple of points lower than I wanted, but it honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it went. If that's the case for you, then I would not cancel. I would not cancel. And the reason for that is that there are many people who have gotten great scores, but they had that vague sense of dread right afterwards. And it's because the test is scary, your adrenaline is running, your heart's racing, and that fight or flight kicks in, and it feels like it was 10 hours of agony, and then it also feels like it went by in the flash of an instant all at the same time. And you walk out of there sweaty and drained. That's the situation that everyone's in. Even when it doesn't count and it's just a practice run, that it can still happen. It's normal. But if that's all you're feeling, I would keep the score. Because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. This is a myth, and it's one of the biggest myths that I still hear from students, even though law schools have not been averaging multiple scores for well over 10 years now. It was back in 2006 when the American Bar Association changed their policy from averaging multiple scores and requiring law schools to submit all the scores of their students and calculate an average, which was then what US News and World Report used for their ever important rankings. And it's funny because nobody reads the US News for anything else, but they suddenly think they're the most important source when it comes to rankings. Other places do rankings too, and one of the biggest things you want to look for rankings on is employment outcomes, not their highest average LSAT scores. But anyway, I digress. The point is that law schools don't average multiple scores anymore. They have not done so since 2006. And any school that tells you they're averaging multiple scores is lying to you. And I don't really know why they're lying to you, but I think it's because they want to seem more holistic, and because maybe even they themselves don't really know what's going on, because old habits die hard, at least when it comes to the speeches they give law school applicants. But believe me when I tell you that the law schools are not averaging multiple scores because they have no incentive to do so. All they care about is the rankings. That's why they keep working to solicit as many applications as they possibly can. That's why they now want to open it up to the GRE and get rid of the LSAT requirement entirely, which is totally absurd, but that's a topic for another conversation. The point is that they are not averaging multiple scores. They have no reason to do so. And so you have no reason to worry about getting a score that is slightly below what you were hoping for. even if it was 5 or 10 points lower than what you were hoping for, you can always retake, and there's no limit on retaking. So this would not be the end of the world for you. So don't worry. The only time that you should cancel is if something went horribly, horribly wrong, like the person next to you vomited on you, or there was a marching band outside, or the fire alarm went off, or the proctor didn't even give you 30 minutes per section or something. Those are cases where maybe you should cancel. Maybe LSAC will give you a free retake. But ultimately, retaking, not a big deal. Cancellations, not really worth canceling. If you don't want to take it when you're already scheduled for it and it's coming up very soon, then you could withdraw. That is an option for you. And if the LSAT is more than a couple of weeks away for you, you could postpone your test date. And I think they charge you a lesser fee, or let you just pay a small difference to change to the next test date instead. And that's nice. They get a little bit less of your money. If you withdraw, I think they keep all your money. But either way, it's only a small drop in the big scheme of what your law school tuition will be. So I wouldn't worry too much about the fee. Yeah, so anyway, enough on that. Got one question here. How many tests should you take to have a good idea of what your performance on test day would be approximately like? Great question. So I'll answer it by starting with a different question, is how many tests should you take overall timed? You should take at least 10 timed exams before test day. That's what I would typically recommend. So if you're in the final week before your exam, obviously I'm not saying take 10 exams in the next 3 days. Over the next couple of days, just take one exam. That's it. If you want to know where you currently stand, what your current LSAT aptitude is, and where you would most likely score on test day if you took the exam right now, what you want to do is you want to take the average of your most recent 5 exams that you've taken in a fairly recent period of time. So let's say maybe over the past 2 to 3 weeks, you've taken 5 exams. And these are 5 sections, not 4. You take the average of those 5 exams. That is a pretty good indication of where you currently stand. Now, LSAC has what they call a score band, which means that, let's say someone scored a 170. This person's range is 167 to 173, which is a 6-point range. So that person could one day get a 167, the next day get a 173, and LSAC would say the LSAT is perfectly valid, and this is just within our normal realm of score variation. And that comes back to the question earlier about why scores fluctuate. They fluctuate because each exam only has 100 to 101 questions, or approximately, but the LSAT tests more than 101 concepts. There are game types that come up once every 10 exams. There are logical reasoning argument methods of reasoning that only come up once every dozen exams. And there are reading comp topics that come up once in our lifetime and never again. So if you respond particularly well or particularly poorly to one of those things and it shows up on your exam, then your score could vary accordingly. If you get a circle game and you hate circle games, maybe that's your 167. If your exam does not contain a circle game and it contains your favorite reading comp topic ever, then you might get a 173, but you're the same person. Or maybe one day you're sharper than another day. So based on how you slept, what you ate, whether you did drugs the night before, whether the person next to you was distracting or not, all of those things make a difference. And so that's why we need an average. That's why we need a large data set to take the average of. If you vary from one exam to another, and let's say you did great 3 days ago, and your exam tomorrow goes poorly, that doesn't mean that test day will go poorly for you. Maybe it just means that either you were not your sharpest tomorrow, or it meant that that particular exam that you're taking tomorrow is an exam that has a question that you need to work on. And so you want to review that question you had difficulty with in excruciating detail. Whether you get things right or wrong, you want to review them in excruciating detail. That is one of the biggest things you want to focus on if your exam is coming up very soon. You want to look at everything you get wrong, everything that you were down to 2 and you were unsure of, and everything that you got right but could have done more efficiently. You want to look at all of those things. You want to look at what you answered incorrectly and why you answered it incorrectly. What trap did the test makers lay for you? What trap of encouragement did they use to lure you, to pull you towards that wrong answer choice? What trap of discouragement did they use to push you away from the right answer choice? Was it something in the answer choice, or was it something in the stimulus or the passage? If it was a particular topic or method of reasoning or wording, you want to look at that exact thing, and you want to find other questions that exhibit that exact thing as well. So if there's a method of reasoning involving numbers versus percentages, or absolute terms versus relative terms, you want to look at all of those questions that deal with that. You want to go online and search for categorizations of similar questions. If it's a circle game or a pattern game, you want to go and do lots of circle games and pattern games. It's not enough to just look at the answer key and say, oh, duh, I get it now. Like, obviously you don't get it just by looking at the correct answer, or you wouldn't be in this position now. You wouldn't have kept repeating the same mistakes over and over to the point where you've done, 10, 20 exams probably by this point, combining timed and untimed, and you're still not where you want to be. So obviously, you've got to change something about what you're doing. If you were already getting 175 plus, you wouldn't be here right now. So think about whether you're taking the exam the next few days from now, or the next few weeks from now, or months, whatever it is. What could you be doing differently? What is the work that you know you should be doing, but aren't doing because it's easier to just take exam after exam and score it and be happy or sad about your results, and then move on to the next one and say, oh, I get it whenever I look at the answer key? Obviously, that's not enough. The people who do the best are reviewing in excruciating detail. They've got notebooks filled with their own analysis of what was difficult about the problem and why they got it wrong and what they need to do differently. They're not spending time on message boards and forums and blogs. They're not just doing exam after exam or just reading and watching tons of explanations. Sure, all of that stuff can help to some degree, but the real work is in sitting with the practice exams on your own in silent darkness, or maybe not in silent darkness, but in a quiet, sterile environment where you can focus on your own thought process. And that's where the magic happens. And you don't see it. People don't talk about it because they're too busy doing it. The people who are on message boards and forums just complaining or talking about how great they're doing, they're not doing that great, or else they wouldn't be there. The work is in your own analysis. And the reason that you're not doing that enough is because it's not fun. A sign that it's valuable is that it's not fun. Just like a lot of the time, the toughest workouts are the ones that are excruciatingly difficult in the moment, but they also feel really good afterwards because you can take pride in knowing that you've done a great job, that you've given it your all, and you get the results accordingly. So that's where I want you to focus over the next few days before test day. And then day before, you can totally relax. We've talked a bit about that already. And the day of, you wake up early, you're setting multiple alarms. And so if you don't have an alarm clock, get one. Maybe you have an old smartphone that you can use as an alarm clock. Maybe you can have a couple of friends all agree that they're going to call you and go to your house and drag you out of bed in the morning if that's what it comes to, because maybe you won't sleep well the night before. And if you won't sleep well the night before, think about why that might be and what you can do about that now. Maybe you're going to take melatonin or something else. Nothing too strong because you do want to wake up. And if you are trying something new, try it out now. Try it out tonight or tomorrow night so that you have a few nights to put this into practice. But morning of, you're going to wake up early. You're going to know where your test center is, and you're going to have multiple ways of getting there. If your car doesn't start, what do? Is there gas in the car? Do you have your car keys? Is all of that set out and ready to go? If you're taking the public transport, like a bus or a train or a subway, what are you going to do if it's not running well that morning? If you're taking it on a Saturday, oftentimes public transit is not the smoothest. It's not as frequent. Got to think about that. If you were taking it on a weekday, maybe there's rush hour traffic and you got to think about that. You want to think about when you're getting there, how you're getting there, where exactly is the test center. If it's on some college campus, it might be tough to find. Try to figure out where it is before the morning of. Call the office of that college or university and see if you can track down the source who would know that information. Maybe if it's somewhere in the city, you have to hunt it down and know exactly what the cross streets are and write that down for yourself. You want to have that all mapped out because you can't bring your cell phone and can't use that to navigate. And believe me, they are very serious about that. I even heard a story once of proctors who, oh my God, this is rich. I can't believe they actually did this. They asked everyone who has their cell phone with them, bring it up here and we'll hold it for you. Then when those people brought their cell phones up to the proctors kicked them all out. They were such jerks. I cannot believe they did that to those test takers. They totally faked them out. And legally, I think you could call that entrapment. But anyway, that's what they did. There's some talk of changing that and having some sort of place you can store your phone. But right now, that's not the case. And they are very serious about this. So don't bring your phone. Leave it at home. Obviously, the question becomes, well, how do I survive? How do I breathe? How do I get picked up? Hey, listen, people took the LSAT before cell phones. There is a way. Maybe there is a payphone that's not too dusty or gross, and you could go find that payphone and bring some quarters and use that. Or maybe you could ask some nice stranger on the street to help you out. Or maybe you could ask one of the other test takers who shouldn't have brought their phone, but did anyway, and ask if they'll do you a favor after the exam. Or maybe you can figure it out for yourself and have something ready. But yeah, you'll figure that out. I'm not too worried about you. Have your gallon-sized Ziploc ready to go. Have your Cliff Bars, your banana, your 20-ounce water bottle, your admission ticket, your photo, your government ID with your actual official name that is also the same exact name that is on your admission ticket. If it varies even slightly, you could have a problem. So figure that out now. Like seriously now, like go email LSAC right now after we get off this conversation and deal with that. Have your photo ready to go. Print all of this stuff out. Don't realize morning of, oh wait, my printer's out of ink, or I don't have a printer. Like this is something you could deal with now. So deal with it now. Test day, you're going to want to get there early. I wouldn't recommend talking with anyone else because you never know what other people will say. And sometimes strangers are crazy. That's why we don't talk to them very often. But if you encounter a stranger, then just say, listen, I'm in my own space right now. Let's chat afterwards. And be in your own zone. Meditate, do your practice problems, go take a walk. As long as you know where the test center is, you can always circle back just a couple minutes beforehand. They're going to have you spend probably a half hour just focusing on bubbling, your name and your address. Really simple stuff that should take like 5 minutes, but for some reason always takes like 30. So consider that your moment of zen and just relax. And at least you're bubbling something that doesn't really count. So you can't get your name wrong. That's good, right? So You do that, you have your pencils, you have your erasers, you have whatever else you need. You don't drink too much water or coffee. You don't want to have to go to the bathroom. Make sure you go to the bathroom before you walk in there, because you might have nerves and not want to go again until the break. So yeah, those are a lot of the things that are coming to mind right now with day of. Don't argue with the proctors. They are the bosses and the police of the room. So do your best to make a reason to point to them, a reasoned discussion, a chat with them about the rules. And if they're violating them in some way, do your best to show them reason, but you don't want to get in trouble. They are the dictators of the room, and if you're doing anything that's even the slightest bit wrong, they will call you out on that. I did have one student email me who got in trouble for apparently bubbling one section when they were on to the next one, and going back to the previous page of the booklet. Like, none of that is kosher, none of that's allowed, and they do check for that stuff. Also, don't cheat off the person next to you, because they may have a different section than you do, and you could be bubbling the wrong thing for nothing. And they might not be as smart as you anyway. So don't assume that just because they're wearing glasses, they know more. That doesn't always work out that way. And yeah, you obviously don't want to get in trouble because of this sort, because if that's on your record, man, like, you're in trouble when it comes up for bar review. Like, they take that stuff seriously. Ethical stuff is taken very seriously, and people have been caught for LSAT related stuff. So yeah, you don't want that to be you. We got a few minutes before I've got to bounce and go walk the dog, but happy to answer just one or two more questions if you got anything in mind. So I'm here for you, and this is probably your last chance to talk to me before the exam. So better make it a good one. Let's see, what have we got here? What technique have you found most useful to overcome self-limiting beliefs? That's a great question. I have a lot of self-limiting beliefs, believe it or not. I've certainly created a lot of stuff, but I was actually a little nervous to do live YouTube Q&As like this. And I wanted to do something like this for quite a while before I actually did. And you could say that's stupid, because why wouldn't you? It's easy, it's free. You got people here who want to hear what you have to say, and you know your stuff. But here's the thing. As you may have guessed by now, I'm not the most tech savvy person. Even though I'm young, I've always been more on the humanities side of things. So that's why I got into LSAT related stuff. It's not like I went to like a med school or something like that. Calc was never my thing, certainly. But it seems scary to try something new like this, in part because it's a new tech thing, and in part because it's live. And I was talking with a friend of mine. He's actually my coach, and I have my own coach. I found it enormously helpful. It helps me see when I have blinders on, and point out errors in my thinking that I couldn't spot for myself. And one thing I found is that my self-limiting belief about doing live Q&As like this was that I was afraid it wouldn't go perfectly. And if it wouldn't go perfectly, then it would automatically have gone terribly, and I would look bad, and this would be something that's on record out there in the world for everybody to see. And I realized that it doesn't need to be perfect, that the things I've created so far, they're great, they're useful. I would even go as far to say they're pretty amazing, the stuff that I've created. And I don't say that to like toot my own horn, but because I really have seen the results that my students get, and you can go read them in the LSAT diaries. Like, I don't pay enough attention to those myself, because I just move on to the next thing. And I'm focused on helping the current student, not the one who's already gotten the score increase. But people find my stuff helpful, even though it's not perfect. Even though it's not perfect, it's still good enough, or maybe even great enough. And so I realized that even if my YouTube live Q&As weren't going to be perfect, as you can see, I just misspoke, so obviously I'm not perfect, that they would still be helpful, and that would be good enough. And if one didn't go well, there's always the next one. And I think that holds true for the LSAT also. My self-limiting belief, and it might be yours too, is What if it doesn't go as well as I want it to? And for me, I want it to be perfect. What if it just goes good, or just goes great, or even just goes okay? Turns out there's always the next one. Just like there's always the chance for me to do another live Q&A, there's always the chance for you to take another LSAT exam, to retake. So my request for you is take this upcoming LSAT like it's not the real thing. Like it's not the end all be all. I mean, obviously it matters. You put a lot of work in right now up to this point, and I certainly hope it goes well, and I'm sure you do too, even more so. But if it doesn't go well, you always have a next opportunity to do things better. So I would encourage you, keep that in the back of your mind. If this exam doesn't go great, there's always one a few months away, or less even. So you could focus and reorient yourself towards that and aim to do better the next time. So I will leave you with that for now. Good night, and thank you all for coming. I hope that you rock the exam whenever you're taking it, and reach out and please let me know how it goes for you.